Chapter 7. A Mother's Desperate Battle for Time. Despite his efforts then, King Louis had left his kingdom in a perilous position. Jadwiga, not yet of age, Mary only 12, Elizabeth at 50 still beautiful, and eager to prove that she possessed capacities hitherto unrecognized, but nevertheless commanding little confidence. These were to steer the threatened ship of state. There seemed to be little hope for a steady course, with Elizabeth as pilot. At last she had position, but already how distractingly more complicated than she had expected was her task. There were plots and counterplots on all sides, many of them centering on Nicholas of Gara. Certain powerful nobles above him in birth, who had long resented his position of influence with the Angevin family, believed their chance to unseat him had arrived. But it was not jealousy of Nicholas, nor the dangers lurking in Hungary's relations with Venice, with the province of Ruthenia, and with Naples, not the many other political problems that made the Queen look from Buda Hill across the marvelous panorama of ridges and river and plain into a world dark with uncertainty. It was the fact that beneath all political ambition ran the stronger current of her mother love. What was in store for Mary Jadwiga? She had won a coveted position only through bitter bereavement. Was she to pay the added price of her children's happiness? There were nights when she gathered them in her arms in a very panic of apprehension. However, from too many such hours, a natural lightheartedness and optimism rescued her. Also, her religion sustained her. As perplexities multiplied, she prayed more frequently before the Madonna, above the prie-dieu, in her chamber, and before the crucifix in the royal chapel. Her course, she felt, would have been much clearer had King Louis been but chosen other sons-in-law. She appreciated the growing importance of the Luxembourg and Habsburg houses, and her husband's reasoning in making his grave double decision. But she found Sigismund unsympathetic. Their differences already made Mary unhappy. She would postpone that marriage as long as possible, and she was still unreconciled to the Austrian alliance. Sigismund, who had gone to Poland with an army to claim the throne, had been forced to return to Hungary before reaching the capital. Indeed, every report from Poland made it clear that the Slavs were steadfastly determined not to accept him as king and Mary as queen. Well, if the inheritances had to be exchanged, Elizabeth felt she would not find that too difficult. She had never abandoned the hope of dropping William. In this transfer might lie her opportunity. She would agree to the Pole's proposal. But there could be no question of parting now with Jadwiga. Send her beautiful younger daughter, not yet of age, not yet prepared, to Poland? She knew what danger stalked in that disordered country. She remembered that her mother-in-law had fled after the massacre of over 150 Hungarians who had sought refuge in the royal castle at Krakow. Never would her mind be at peace, with Jadwiga, so young, holding a scepter of such uncertain potentialities. She must be clever enough to hold fast to the Polish crown and at the same time to her child. Whereupon Elizabeth launched one of the most amazing games of royal hide-and-seek ever witnessed. She was almost continuously in consultation with one of her advisors, or with the whole royal council over other matters. But her passionate concern centered on this mother's battle with Poland. Back and forth across the northern border hurtled promises and explanations, galloped messengers and envoys. Meetings were held, courts assembled. From the Pope and the Holy Emperor down, the arbiters of Europe had their parts in the game, for chaos in Poland invited meddling from all sides. The young people at Buda court knew little of these happenings. Their study program and occupations proceeded as they had before, though Mary and Jadwiga saw their mother less frequently now, and often felt her preoccupation when she was with them. They knew that she was struggling to keep them together. Jadwiga's teachers, Scribe John, the Bishop of Veszprém, and the others, kept close to her during these crucial months, and while pushing her studies, surrounded her with a protecting affection. To the pages and girls at court, The romantic aspect of the drama was thrilling. Der Jadwiga, to travel to far Poland, to be queen over millions of people. If only Queen Elizabeth would arrange for them to go with the escort, at least as far as Diosgyör or Kassa. At times, Jadwiga caught her companion's romantic enthusiasm, but mostly she clung to the thought that her mother would succeed, and that when later she had to go away to an unknown land, William would go with her. Above all, she was determined, once uncertainties ended, and she knew what she must do, to act as her father would expect her to. Next to the game of selecting the accompanying cavalcade, none was more engrossing than that of choosing the treasure Jadwiga should take with her. The wooden travel chest stood ready to be filled. The Queen Regent, though counting on her skill in evasion, felt it wise to be prepared for an emergency. Jadwiga's personal chests, with their iron locks, carving and painting, and the Magyar and Angevin arms in relief, were adequate to serve a princess and prospective queen. Inside they were all musk and rose scent. There were pretty scenes, when, forgetting their sorrow and the heavy cares of royalty, mother and daughters, with close friends, bent over designs and colors, deciding between this or that brocade or fur. Often someone teasingly demanded of Jadwiga William's ideas as to what would be most becoming to a queen and his bride. He had returned for a time to his father's court. Successive royal agreements arranged the length of these exchanged visits for the betrothed. Jadwiga's governess companion spent much of her day bustling to and from the room where the wardrobe was being assembled. She would, of course, go with her princess. The Queen Regent and Queen Mary realized that with Jadwiga so far away, they would find comfort in the thought of Anna's vigilance. They welcomed, too, the Bishop of Veszprém's promise to present her with a protecting bit of the horn of a unicorn to wear on a necklace. Several neighboring monasteries possessed such coveted treasure, which detected poisons and cured ills. The touching scenes at Buda were being paid for in misery. At Krakow, in all Poland, what tragedy of disunion! Finally, with the breach between the nobles of Great Poland and those of Small Poland ever widening, and with civil war in actuality, the magnates desperately determined to end Elizabeth's maneuvering. If Jadwiga were not to be sent to them, they would proceed to choose a king. They called a meeting at Sieradz to assemble in its church during the latter part of February 1383. There they would officially declare the succession. The Queen Regent sent trusted counselors led by the Bishop of Veszprém to represent her at this meeting. They were to speak in her name, and while lamenting the results of the strife between rival factions in Poland, were to insist on her right under their agreement with King Louis to name one of his daughters to be their queen. She would gladly have sent Mary, but since that was now impossible, she released them from all promises they had formerly made to Mary and Sigismund. She would send them Louis's younger daughter, provided, however, that the Poles would unqualifiedly promise to let her return after her coronation for 3 years longer with her mother. It was a stormy session. The influential Archbishop Bodzanta, leader of the Polish Legitimist Party, which was made up chiefly of magnates of Great Poland who wished the pious line restored, directed the opposition to an Angevin ruler. He was there to see Zaimowit of the pious line elected. This duke of the feudal province of Mazovia was the strongest prince in Poland. Incidentally, no Slavs were physically more superb than these Mazovians. It was said that even their women could snap an iron bar with their hands. In a sonorous voice, Bodzanta asked, "Do you want Zaimowit of Mazovia as king?" "Yes," shouted his followers. "We want him, and we beg you to crown him." But up jumped Jasko of Tenksin, long a loyal supporter of Louis, and after calling for quiet, began to speak. "Noble men and brothers," he said, "it is not seemly that we be over hasty in this choice. We are bound to keep faith with Jadwiga, the daughter of Louis. If she will come to us at Easter, agreeing to live with her husband in our country, and to rule here as queen, we will welcome her. Otherwise, we will choose a king. We have given the dead King Louis this promise and strengthened it by letter and by seal." Thus, amidst tremendous applause, he swung the delegates to the support of Jadwiga. They declared her queen and requested that she come to them at Pentecost, 6 weeks after Easter, to be crowned. The Bishop of Veszprém and the others hurried back to Buda with their report of the meeting. At Pentecost, leaders of all parties in Poland flocked to Sandek, nearer the border than Krakow, to welcome the Queen Mother and her daughter. Archbishop Bodzanta went with them, which was not surprising, but it was surprising that he should be accompanied by 500 well-armed men. And above all, why, concealed in their midst, should ride Duke Zaimowit, the most powerful rival aspirant of the crown. All quarters buzzed with rumors of a plot. The Archbishop and the Duke planned to return to Krakow before the others, to hold it with armed men, and on Jadwiga's arrival, seize her, marry her to Zaimowit, and crown them together, king and queen. Although there were neither telephone nor radio, secrets escaped then as now, speeding by plume and stirrup. Krakow was warned, and the good burghers got ready to lock the gates against the plotters. And Queen Elizabeth, who had reluctantly started with Jadwiga and journeyed northward up the Tisza Valley as far as Kassa, now saw fate again playing into her hands. At Kassa, she encountered spring floods and decided that these waters might serve as sufficient excuse for a retreat. But now she saw 2 roads of escape. She dispatched messengers to Sandek to report that, since, unfortunately, floods prevented her from proceeding farther, she hoped that the Poles would send representatives to Kassa to discuss her difficult position with her, which they did. Kastellan Dobislav, Spitko of Melstin, Sedjivoy of Slubin, and other officials came, and after reviewing in detail the decisions of the meeting at Serats, and discussing the situation from all sides, in particular the dangers of the Bodzanta-Zaimowit kidnapping plot, they finally accepted a further postponement. Jadwiga was to come to them definitely in November. Furthermore, they agreed that if she were to die without heirs, the Polish crown would go to Mary, and that if Mary should die childless, the Hungarian crown would go to Poland, an agreement which ran counter to the desires of both peoples. After this conference, the representatives returned to the north, the great nobles bearing many gifts, and the lesser ones, as usual, without fruits. This was in May, and by November, the negotiators believed Zaimowit would have been obliged to occupy himself with affairs in his dukedom. Sigismund was preparing to invade it from the south, with 12,000 Hungarians reinforced by troops from Krakow and Sandomir, and from the northeast, the dread Jagiello, ruler of Lithuania, was ready to cross the frontier to harry the marches. In addition, the Teutonic Knights might, by November, have withdrawn the support which Elizabeth charged they were furnishing Zaimowit. But these eventualities were still in the future. Actually, the Mazovian considered himself as good as crowned, having advanced as far as the church of St. Florian near Krakow, and had the gates of the city shut before him. He was planning his next move, when a delegation of Krakowians appeared to appeal to him to retire without harming the capital. This he agreed to do, and at Korczyn waited for news from Kassa. If necessary, he would watch the frontier, and yet kidnap Jadwiga as she crossed it. While he waited, the Queen Regent, with intense relief, was hurrying with her daughter back along the Tisza Valley to Buda. The whole adventure was replete with thrills, a superlatively comic performance if one could forget the helpless millions in the background, and if one could forget Jadwiga. 6 months reprieve, relief, satisfaction on Buda Hill. And alas, what a growing network of intrigue at court, where the Queen Regent, following first this and then that bad counsel, allowed herself to get increasingly entangled. That flexibility, which had so long served her well, was now leading her to the brink of a precipice. In November of 1383, as St. Martin's Day approached, all Poland looked toward Hungary, whence Louis's daughter, who was to rescue the land from the unholy disorder into which it had fallen, would come. Many watched with misgiving, well justified. The day arrived, but no queen came. For once again, Elizabeth broke her promise. The governor of Krakow, Jadwiga, decided to go in person to Buda and to take with him Jasko, Kastian of Sandomir, and several other officials, all desperately determined this time to put an end to the queen's perfidies. When they arrived, they found that she had left for Zara in Dalmatia to quell a disturbance there, and to Zara the governor of Krakow and his suite followed her. From the first he was apprehensive. Elizabeth received him coolly. Their interviews did not progress smoothly. She sent Jasko back to Krakow with the request that the Capitol Hill and the city be turned over to Hungarian troops stationed in Poland, whereupon Jadwiga managed to send a messenger to warn the Poles. Even if you hear they are burning me alive, do not turn Krakow over to Hungarian troops, he wrote. Then, fearing imprisonment, he himself fled to Krakow and by relays reached there before his messenger. Elizabeth's anger flamed. In retaliation, she imprisoned his cousins and several other Polish nobles. It is not difficult to imagine the impression that reports of these happenings made in Poland. The nobles met on March 2nd of this year, 1384, at Radomsko, and decided to send their final ultimatum to Hungary, this time by a soldier. Brave von Welsky would carry it. The queen regent was to produce Princess Jadwiga within 2 months, or a king would be chosen. Moreover, no single other embassy would be sent to Hungary. But despite this declaration, there were further delays, and another envoy did go to Buda, Spitko of Melstein, before Elizabeth, convinced that further equivocation meant certain defeat, capitulated. She had been fighting for time and had gained 2 years, fighting also for the concession that once crowned, Jadwiga would continue her education at Buda. This stipulation to which she had held so tenaciously, largely because the Poles distrusted her motive, she lost. Those watching with anxiety her unsteady course, even those most devoted to her, thought of how differently, with how much surer hand, either King Louis or his mother would have fought this amazing battle of the Polish succession. And now the limit of time neared. Very soon Elizabeth's child, but King Louis's daughter and Poland's queen, must depart from Buda.